Well, good morning. Well, maybe it's not morning when you're reading this, but anyway, or watching this. We are starting to read a book called Ramayana. At least that's how I pronounce it. The Divine Loophole by Sanjay Patel. And in the beginning of it, it has his artwork and it has an introduction by him that you need to read. So it's a little hard to read on the screen, so I thought I would read it to you. Epic mythology without all the paper cuts. I love books. This is by Sanjay Patel, by the way. I love books, but I hate reading them. Books put me to sleep. I can't even read a comic book without getting distracted by the cool artwork. As bad as I am about reading, I'm even worse with writing. Despite this fact, I decided I was going to write my own book, and I illustrated it, and I composed it, and it actually got published as The Little Book of Hindu Deities. And believe it or not, people liked it. I was so inspired by the experience that I decided to make a second book, and I tossed around a lot of ideas, but once I picked up on the Ramayana, all other potential book proposals hit the back burner. I was hooked. It was an epic Indian tale. I am certain that for most people, Ramayana is just an unpronounceable word, but for me, Ramayana is part of my cultural identity, though until recently I wouldn't have been able to explain what it meant if someone had asked. The world of the Ramayana was ingrained in me as a kid through the details of living with Hindu parents. For instance, every time I sneezed, my mom and dad would say, "Sita Rama." I had no idea what that phrase meant, just like I had no idea why we had a framed illustration of a giant monkey carrying a mountain, or why my dad made me count mala beads while chanting Rama, 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 and eventually I started researching Hindu mythology for my first book. And I began to scratch the surface of the Ramayana, but the story didn't really come alive for me until I picked up a book and read the entire saga. I discovered a wonderful English language adaptation of the Ramayana by the esteemed author Ashok Kale Bunker. His retelling weighed in at a roughly 3,000 pages, and it took me the better part of a year to read. As I read, the mythology sprang to life with full force. In all its wisdom, I could feel my life being changed. For the first time, I began to see and understand the characters of Rama and Sita as my parents did. I began to understand why I would be considered auspicious to speak their names, or why Hanuman's devotion to Prince Rama epitomized the extraordinary feat of moving a literal mountain of medicine would be worthy of worship. It all began to make sense as I discovered a story that is the bedrock of Hindu and Indian culture. The Ramayana's characters and legends have been deified and worshipped throughout India and in much of Southeast Asia as well. The enduring story is revered in Thailand as the Remaker, performed as well as in Burma and Laos and Malaysia. The Ramayana has crossed cultures and eras to show no signs of dying, and its conflicts and themes are as relevant and constant as the human spirit. The more I began to understand the Ramayana, the more inspired I felt to carry on the tradition of retelling the tale by creating an illustrated version. Since most people aren't inclined to sit through the 1,000-page-long adaptation, I relied on graphic storytelling to capture attention and imagination. With the same spirit in mind, I wrote a much shorter and surmised version of the mythology. So, if you're familiar with the Ramayana, chances are that some anecdotes and details may be missing or reimagined in this version. My aim isn't to butcher this great mythology, but to simply share it with people in a casual manner and an entertaining way. If I've done my job right, this book will serve as a vivid introduction to a much fuller version of the story. At the very least, it will help people to understand why Hindus honor a blue warrior and a flying monkey holding a mountain. Jaya Hanuman, Jaya Rama, victory to Hanuman, victory to Rama. Sanjay Patel, Oakland, California.